A warm welcome to our partnership panel. These panels are a forum for learning experts and people managers in global organisations to come together in a purposeful way to drive performance. I'm Lucy Phillip and I'm the CEO and founder of Purposefully Blended. We're a boutique consultancy that specialises in developing learning and development professionals and transforming leaders into compassionate coaches. We believe that when learning professionals work in strong partnership and alignment with people managers, that's where learning transfers into behaviour change and performance. We're delighted to host talented and experienced global leaders on our panels, working for some of the biggest organisations in the world. It's important to note that the opinions of our panellists are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions and beliefs of their organisation. We hope you enjoy the episode. Today, in honour of International Coaching Week, which starts on Monday, we're going to be focusing on coaching as a leadership superpower. It has the potential to transform you and your team's performance. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next hour or so. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome a fabulous global panel to our LinkedIn audio stage. And I'm going to invite them all to introduce themselves to you now. So let's start with you, Glenn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Glenn Hurst, and I'm currently a capability partner at GSK. But my background has been as L&D consultant for the last 12 years. And before that, very much a coach. So coaching's a real fundamental skill, I believe, in anybody who works with teams, works as part of a team or leads a team. And I'm delighted to be here today.
Thanks so much, Glenn. I'm delighted to have you on the panel as well. Over to you, Rich.
Hi, everyone. My name's Rich Lawford. It's great to see some of my colleagues and former colleagues online. I work currently for Bristol Myers Squibb as Director of Intercon Training. I lead our training teams in some of our markets outside of the US. And I've been involved in training and rolling out coaching programs in a number of global pharma companies over the last 7 or 8 years. And before that, I was a head of sales and sales manager. So I've had personal experience of being trained in coaching and then going on to lead teams, and then being very fortunate to be able to be involved in rolling out and developing coaching programs, which we've been able to utilize for our people leaders across the world. So really pleased to be here. It's a subject I'm very passionate about, and thanks for inviting me, Lucy.
Thanks, Rich. And over to you, Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Lucy, as one of my coaches for inviting me to be part of this panel. I've been in a role of sales in some form or another for about 20 years. And really, in the grand scheme of my career, fairly new to the sales management role. I've been a sales manager for only about 4 years. And so really grateful, Lucy, you talked about the word superpower, and really grateful for the role that coaching capabilities has played in my career most recently. And just thrilled to be here with Glenn and Richard to talk about the experience that I've had in leading my team.
Thanks, Glenn. I really appreciate you joining in what is probably a significantly earlier for you than anyone else on the panel as well. So Carolyn's joining us from Toronto. So the way this session will run is that I will pose a series of questions to our panel, and they will discuss between them their experiences, challenges, wisdom in a way that I hope that you will all benefit from in the audience. So I think we're now going to move on to the discussion and on to the first question. So I'm going to come over to you first, Rich. So why do you think and feel that coaching is such an important leadership skill?
Thanks, Lucy. Well, you mentioned it at the beginning in terms of, what coaching is there to do. But I guess, why do I think it's such an important leadership skill? Well, it's always featured in the leadership capability frameworks and models that I've been involved in over the many global companies I've worked in. And, there's much research out there to support, that demonstrate the value and the impact that coaching brings in the workplace. Oftentimes we might think of coaching in the context of sports, but certainly in the workplace it's demonstrated year over year. And we know that effective coaching drives many things: better performance, more employee and higher employee engagement. It can improve recruitment and retention. It can really enable people development. ultimately, as I like to think about it, coaching really is there to unlock a person's potential to help them maximize their performance. And clearly, if you're a people leader in an organization where people are often, if not always, our greatest asset, then we need to be really focused as a leader about how we can help people realize their potential. And ultimately, then that will lead to great performance and a culture of somewhere where people want to show up to work, to give their all and to be successful. So I think it's that key ingredient. And I think if it's missing, you really notice it.
Great, thanks, Rich. Just going to come over to you quickly now. Glenn, why do you think that coaching is such an important leadership skill?
I think for me, when I reflect on coaching, I always try and simplify it a little bit, because coaching, when we say coaching, people go, oh, coaching. And it's all just about having an honest conversation with a purpose and a desired outcome. And if we can align on where we're going and why we want to go there, then coaching is the tool that potentially helps us to get there. And, Rich, you said it's about a key part of capability frameworks, and it is, isn't it? Because it's a directed intervention that supports capability development. And too frequently, it becomes something that we tell people to do rather than support and ask them to develop their skills in. So when I think about the role that it plays, it's that if we are open about where we need to go to as individuals or organisations, then coaching is the biggest toolkit that we can have, because everything we need potentially sits within there.
Thanks, Glenn. You touched there on asking rather than telling as a leader. So is there anything else that you think sets coaching apart in terms of its leadership style from other styles?
I think for me, and I don't know how familiar people are with things like situational leadership, but there's always a time and a place for when we need to tell somebody, when they're new in role, when they're new on a project, when they need that direction. And asking somebody at that circumstance what they want to do and how they want to get there might not automatically get you the result that you want. And Rich, you made the point about sports coaching. I think of business coaching as being somewhere in the middle of that life coaching spectrum, where it's all ask, or sports coaching where potentially it's very much that tell. So it's got to be a blend, but then we've got to use the skills appropriately. So for 75% of the interventions, it's probably the right thing to do. And then there's about 25% of them where we do need to give that direction and tell. But the skill of a great leader is knowing when they need to stop telling and start asking. And that's when they move from giving that direction to starting to coach and thinking about, how do I support the person to get there by themselves? Because if they have it within them, they can. We often don't allow them to, because we think, I've got a better way of doing this, or I know how to do it. And we think that if we tell them, we'll speed up the process. So, for me, it's how do we blend those two things so that we get the right outcome for the right situation, because we have those coaching skills in our kit.
Thanks, Glenn. And apart from questions, what else do you think makes a brilliant coach? So I'm going to come over to you, Carolyn, for this one. So apart from our questioning skills, what else makes up being a brilliant coach?
It's a good question, because both of my colleagues here have talked about how the difference between they've used the analogy in sport, and they've used the idea of knowing when to tell and knowing when to ask powerful questions. And I think, Lucy, your question around what else outside of questioning makes a brilliant coach is someone who has the confidence in the model that they're using, or confidence in the framework that they're using, to let people be themselves. And so when I first became a sales manager, I was very successful as a sales rep, and I thought everyone needed to be like me and do it my way in order to be successful. And that is absolutely not the case. And that's what I learned. I learned to give my sales leaders space to get to the end their way. And I was able to lean on the framework that I was taught as a coach in order to provide them with the space to get there. And so that they could always remain to be themselves and be authentic in their own way of achieving the business goals, through the opportunity for me to guide them.
Thanks, Carolyn. I'm glad that you said that. And I think, it's It's no coincidence that many people that are promoted into manager roles go by default into telling and instructing, because often they're promoted on the basis of the fact that they were very, very good at doing the job. Just like you've said there, sales managers promoted on the basis that they were great salespeople. So in the absence of being taught any leadership skills, it's pretty obvious that you're going to default into what it is that you know best. And what you know best is how to go about doing the job. And that's so often what I would see when I was out in the field supporting managers to develop their coaching skills, that tendency to jump in and take over the call because you feel that you know better and you feel that you know that your way is the only way to do it. So I love that you've talked about giving space. What about you, Rich? What else do you think is important to that coaching approach?
Yeah, it was interesting listening to Carolyn, because that was definitely my mistake when I first became a manager, to think there was one way. And I guess, I was listening to some a great virtual instructor program recently by a coaching company in the UK, and they talk about coaching attitudes. And a couple of things that I sort of really took away from that and reminded is about your attitude as a coach. So yes, there's models and there's steps to follow, and some of those key attitudes, which I think we intrinsically think makes sense, but in the moment, maybe we don't always focus on this. And some of those are, people can think for themselves. So why am I jumping in, to your point, Lucy? Why am I giving my solution? And recognizing that actually each of us has a mind that's incredibly powerful, and given space and given time and maybe given structure, it can think for itself and it can actually bring out the solution. And so I think that some of those things around tools and frameworks are important, but actually there's a really important part as a coach about what's your attitude when you go into a coaching conversation. And, those are just a few things that came to mind as you were talking.
I'm just going to call out that listening, I think, is one of the absolute fundamental parts of applying a coaching approach. And probably many of you have heard the saying that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And we should look to make sure that we use them in that ratio. And I think the more that we can listen and seek to understand in that leadership role, then the more we will be able to build rapport and trust. And that will then enable us to really accelerate the growth of the people that we work with. So I just wanted to call out listening as an absolute key skill to coaching. So we've talked a little bit about potentially in the field when we're out and we're supporting people in that sales role, coaching skills are really useful. But not everybody in the audience may be in those kind of roles or may not even be within sales roles. So, Carolyn, I'm going to come over to you to talk about, in what situations do you think coaching skills are really useful?
Well, I have to confess, Lucy, that when I first started learning these skills, I practiced them on my children, and so that was where I really learned to hone in a basic and sort of foundational way. And so, to be honest, I think this spans across my entire professional and personal network. And so even when I'm having conversations with colleagues where we're trying to find a solution to a difficult situation or a difficult problem, it allows me the confidence to suggest something like, consider looking at this from a different perspective. If X, Y, and Z happened, what would that look like? And so, I find myself defaulting almost to that role in many aspects of my life. And so it really has become part of my DNA, to be honest, as a way that I interact with people every day.
Thanks, Carolyn. And often in the programs that I teach coaching skills on, the groups that I work with don't even have direct line management responsibility, and perhaps it's leadership without influence. And leadership without authority, where you're reliant on your influence skills. And that's where coaching is it can really come into its own as well. So there's many different situations where having those basic coaching skills will be incredibly useful. Glenn, have you got any other sort of examples where you think coaching skills could be useful?
I have, but I'm conscious. I think there's a gentleman in the audience who's been waiting to speak. So I don't know whether we wanted to go to him first. Dr. Bernard Muir?
I have a quick question that probably I would appreciate if you share more ideas and maybe your experience. I do agree that coaching is very critical for us in leadership, to help our teams, achieve more. But sometimes you need critical skills, and I know you have been talking about listening as being one of them. But my question is, are there tools and resources that can really help, a manager, to develop or to learn and grow, these critical coaching skills? I think such resources will be helpful for us, to share and learn and become better coaches to our teams. Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking that, because I've actually looked on the LinkedIn wall, and someone else has commented, for someone who may have no baseline or foundation for a coaching approach to leadership, what's your best advice as to where someone should begin learning and developing? Formal training or a book, perhaps? So I'm going to quickly throw that. That was a question we're going to come to, but in the interest of answering it for you right now, I'm going to quickly come to our panel and just see if they can give any recommendations on where to start when you want to develop your coaching skills.
I've got a view, and I know Rachel and Carolyn will as well. I've got, years ago, I bought some Grow coaching cards, right? And Grow is a really simple coaching model, and I really like it because you can find lots of information about it everywhere. And it was also developed specifically for business coaching. And it's that principle that says, what's your goal? What's your current reality? What are the options that you've got that might help you to get there? And then how are we going to agree on the way forward, or some model is the will or the way forward, in a simple nutshell. And what these coaching cards still today really help me to do is, if I've got a conversation, I know what I want the outcome to be, but it might be that somebody else is coming at it from a very different perspective. I will pull these cards out and I will plan my conversation. Great coaching doesn't happen by accident, but neither is it about saying, right, I've asked that question, I'll tick the box and move on. But it is about saying, if you can map out in your head how you might have a conversation that's going to help to funnel it down towards the outcome that might be needed, then that to me is a really great place to start. Sometimes where we don't start often enough as leaders is having that preparation for coaching. And that's what, in my experience or with my insight, I feel sometimes makes it difficult or uncomfortable, is that we think, right, we've got to coach this. Okay, I'll just go in for it. So I'd recommend Grow coaching cards. As I said, mine are very old and very battered, but they were very cheap and they were really, really useful.
Are the 4 steps of the Grow model, and it is really, really simple. The other thing that I always say as well is I think of it like a muscle. And if we wanted to develop a muscle on our body, for example, our calf muscle, we wouldn't go to the gym and do a 60-minute workout straight off on our calf muscle. We would gradually build up to it. And I think the same for coaching. I think take some baby steps, dip your toe in the water, and take some time to review how it's gone. And for me, that might look like, next conversation I have, I'm just going to try and listen that bit harder. Or the next conversation that I have, I'm going to focus on asking a few more open questions rather than closed questions to try and understand a bit more from the perspective of the other person. So take some really simple things and start to introduce them and see what impact it has on the conversations that you're having and the perspective that you're able to gain in those situations. Carolyn, what was good for you when you first started out?
I wanted to call out Glenn's recommendation around the Grow cards, because I was gifted a pack of Grow cards a few years ago, and same with me. They really help provide me with some guidance around the kinds of questions to ask. And so I believe, if I combine both recommendations between questioning and deeply listening, when you have a bank of questions that you're comfortable and confident asking a colleague or someone who reports to you, or anyone in your life for that matter. And if you have those bank of questions already in mind, it allows me the opportunity to listen more deeply and listen with more intent. And it gives me the freedom to not predict where I want the conversation to go. And so I would second and encourage those grow cards. And the other thing is to have an accountability coach. And so if you have someone in your life, a colleague or a mentor, where you could practice having these coaching conversations. For me, the coaching skill has really provided me with an opportunity to have the confidence to have more difficult conversations. And so if you could even, I dare I say, use the term role play a conversation with someone that you trust, they can provide you with the feedback on how you made them feel during that practice conversation.
Thanks, Carolyn. I knew someone would have to mention the dreaded role play. We all hate it, don't we? But unanimously when we run training programs, and I'm sure Rich and Glenn will back me up on this, role play is the thing that people least want to do. But when we do the evaluations at the end of it, it's what people say they get the most value out of. And I think if you can even bring yourself to perhaps recording some conversations that you have or video recording them. It's much easier now. We have a lot of our conversations on Teams. If you can gain permissions from the person that you're with, and you can kind of build up the courage to record the conversation that you have, and then watch it back in the privacy of your own company with a real eye on how much did I listen? How many questions did I ask? What was the balance of talk between me talking and them talking? And, what could I strive to do better next time? I think it really holds a looking glass up and reveals what the style of conversation we are having right now is. Rich, over to you. What are your top tips on how to go about developing that coaching muscle?
On here as L&D professionals, we think about the 70-20-10 approach to learning, right? So, there's some models there and some frameworks, books. Our company has an enterprise license for LinkedIn Learning, and I literally just searched coaching, and there's 2,985 videos or e-learnings on LinkedIn Learning. So if you have LinkedIn Learning in your company, a great resource to get some formal learning. I think building on what Carolyn said about working with others or role-playing together, one of the things that we've been driving in our company with our sales leaders is something we call coaching circles. So it's getting together and discussing particularly challenging or topical situations where we feel we're coaching our team and working together as peers on that. And then, as you said, Lucy, I think it's also about putting it into practice and just reflecting. So how can you self-reflect yourself, even though you might not be able to record or to have somebody observe you, but you can just come back and think, did I prepare well? Did we get an outcome? Do I think the individual that I was working with is clear on what they're going to do next? And I think there's lots of ways in which we can think about how we're applying it on the job. So I definitely think there's lots of ways. There's loads and loads and loads of free resources now, and that's one of the great things as we see the growth of YouTube and we see many people pushing out content for free. It doesn't even require you to put a budgetary investment necessarily to get yourself started. Those things are great. They have a place, but also there's so much at our fingertips that we can access just at the click of a button.
Thanks, Rich. That was really great advice. I was lucky enough to be at Learning Tech in London this week for 2 days, and to see Charles Jennings, or hear Charles Jennings on the stage, who was heavily involved in the 70-20-10. And he talked about taking the 70-20-10 from learning, from the environment of learning, and moving it into the flow of work. And when we move learning into the flow of work, then it's more likely to happen, because we know that one of the biggest barriers is often time. So the more we can move that into the flow of work, the more likely we are to be able to make the time to actually do it. So some of the suggestions that you've made around coaching circles, opportunities to share, peer learning, those opportunities to discuss the real life challenges and think about how you're going to apply a coaching approach to those really reinforce the 70-20-10 in the flow of work. So we'll really support that on the job learning. So I'm going to come back to Bernard now. Did we answer your question, and have we given you something to go on there in terms of developing your skills?
Ideas and the guidance. But I was wondering if there are some specific tools, maybe in the area of technology, maybe some software, that really can help. And also, coaching may vary from probably person to person, or depending on the area of profession and also departments. And are there ways, tools that are specific that someone could really, deploy, to help them be a great coach, in their specific area? I mean, that is something that I'm looking up to, and I appreciate your help on it. Thank you.
One thing I would say, though, is out of all of the leadership programs that I've run over the sort of decade and more that I've been involved in supporting leaders to develop their coaching skills, is that nothing immerses you more than having a coach yourself and actually feeling the difference that it makes to be coached. So what I would say is, if you get an opportunity to be coached, I think that is a great way to fast track and to also catalyst your desire to actually develop those skills yourself. And, you can obviously approach your organisation about bringing in some in-house coaching, or you can look to get your own coach personally. So that is another option to kind of get that a more immersive experience. So I'm now going to move on to the next question. So, Rich, what happens when we don't have a coaching style as leaders, and how does that impact performance?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Lucy. Actually, some of these what if and what will happen questions are things that I think are really great things for us to think about when we are coaching an individual. And so, I would talk about these type of questions as we call consequential questions. What will happen if we do? And what will happen if we don't? And I was just thinking about, Glenn mentioned at the beginning, in I think one of the earlier answers, around a fairly common model called situational leadership by Ken Blanchard. And that talks about the 4 roles that you play as a manager. And I was just thinking about that, and then thinking through, one of those roles is to be able to delegate tasks to your team. And if we don't follow up and support them with coaching through that delegation, they might not have the knowledge, the skills, or the motivations to complete it. And, that could result in, the team not performing well, the individual feeling lost, frustrated. When we think about how we support our team, and that's another area within when we think about the situational leadership model. But actually, if we spend all our time supporting our team, they don't develop themselves, and they don't have the opportunity to think for themselves, maybe to come up with their own solutions, to learn on the projects or the responsibilities. And it kind of reminds me of that persona of the person on the beach on the holiday who's on the phone, because they can't take a week off because their team are so reliant on them if we're too supportive. And then when we think about that 4th area around directing our team, if we focus too much on directing our team and telling them what to do, as you mentioned earlier, Lucy, we could sit back and think that everyone understands what we've told them to do, they're happy with what they're doing, and that it aligns with them, they're motivated towards it. And again, it could result in disengagement, poor performance, frustration. So I really think that coaching is the glue on a day-to-day practical level. It's the way that we help our team to achieve what they want to achieve, and in a work context, what we're looking to achieve as a company or as a department or as a team. So I really feel like if it's missing in many areas, it really leads to some suboptimal outcomes or some poor performance or poor engagement from our team members.
Thanks, Rich. That really resonates. I've been writing an article actually for International Coaching Week next week that I'll be releasing, and I've been really looking at what gets in the way of managers coaching more. The evidence is overwhelming that coaching is the number one thing that you can do as a manager to catalyst the performance of your people. But what stops what stops managers from doing it? And what you've described there is what we term the always-on manager. And, what are the consequences for the always-on manager is often it leads to stress and burnout inevitably. So, that is the consequence of not taking more of a coaching approach, not trusting people to take ownership of their own work, not trusting people to develop skills and find their own ways of doing things, because you have to feel as if you have to constantly monitor what's being done all of the time. And that can be really quite draining and difficult with the hybrid way of working now, where potentially we have very little exposure to people on a day-to-day basis to know what's going on. And someone once said to me, it's not what happens when you're with people that you need to worry about. It's what happens when you're not with them. And we're not with people most of the time now with the way global organizations work. So coaching skills are what is going to support us to develop what happens when we're not with people, and to give them the confidence to actually be able to work in an autonomous and independent way. Thank you. Glenn, did you have anything to add in terms of what happens if we don't sort of help managers to develop those coaching skills?
I think, Richard summed it up beautifully. And for me, it's that thing that says coaching is about somebody else. It's not about you. And I was just having a quick look at the audience, and my very first coach is in the audience. And Mr. Colleran, thank you. Because when we think about what happens if we don't give managers the skills to coach, that level of responsibility and accountability that you feel you need to hold for others is huge. But we can only ever be responsible for ourselves. And coaching is, again, one of those tools that helps others. About, if you put yourself on the receiving end of you, what are you trying to achieve? And the only way of achieving the outputs that somebody else deserves from you is to make coaching about them and not about you.
Thanks, Glenn. That's brilliant. I think we all remember our first coach and the impact that they had on us. And it really brings me back to what I was saying about take the opportunity to be coached yourself if you get the opportunity, because it will just be transformational for you. So with that in mind, I'm going to come on to what are your personal stories in relation to coaching for both you and your organisation. And I want to start with you, Carolyn.
Oh, thanks, Lucy. I think I had referred in the beginning of this conversation that I'm relatively speaking, fairly new into the role of coaching. We're talking about 4 years. And when I first became a sales manager, it was probably a year or 2 years sooner than what I had expected to happen as it related to my plan for my development in my career. And so, to be totally honest, I wasn't ready. And so I defaulted to the way I used to do it as a field representative. And there was a lot of stumbles. There was a lot of starts and stops. And so while actually when you came into my life, it was in a period of time that was very stressful for me. And to be honest, I didn't feel that I was ready to catapult myself into a learning or development environment. But I know I had to, because I wasn't having the impact that I wanted to have with my team. And so I really forced myself and disciplined myself to follow the steps and follow the framework that was offered. And it happened to be the GROW model that Glenn referred to earlier on. And it really, gave me an anchor to hold on to in order to trust that this process was a journey, and that I was going to get to a place that I needed to be in order to be the best leader for my team. And looking back, it did. And so, I think I was thinking about, the question is what happens if you don't coach? I think the biggest risk is that for me personally, I would have defaulted to doing it my way. And what I've been able to see and what I've been able to accomplish, in the last 4 years, is I'm able to let people be themselves, and I'm able to see the potential, and I'm able to be curious enough to see how people do and see and think differently than I do. And the result of that is I now have a team of extraordinary professionals that are very different from myself and each other. And so they're able to complement, they're able to debate, and they're able to bring their own individual talents into a unified environment. And so that we are just far better than we ever could have been had I defaulted to doing it my way. And so I'm quite proud of the diverse team that I lead, because I've been able to see how different they are, and I've been able to see their potential, and I've been able to have the confidence to have difficult development conversations with them in order for them to really flourish and be the best versions of themselves every day.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carolyn. And you should feel proud. You were getting lots of love hearts from the audience when you were sharing your story. And I think you should feel proud because, you know, the amount that you invested into developing your coaching skills over the months that we were working together, it was no surprise to me that you saw the results from it. So the more we can just put the effort in, the more we can get conscious about what we're doing, it really reaps rewards. So thanks for sharing your story. And I think it's a really nice message that does teams, you know, it's challenging, and it brings a whole different dynamic when we can have a team of people that think differently to the way that we do. And coaching skills give you the confidence that you can have a team that are different to you, and that you will be able to lead them, and that you will be successful as a team. So thanks for sharing that. Glenn, how about you? What's your personal story been?
So I think my personal story is sort of a really, really varied one around coaching, because I started off with a coach. And that's because when I moved into the pharmaceutical industry, I was utterly clueless about what I was doing. And as I said, my very first trainer took on the role of coaching me to keep me, I think. It was like, she's going to go if we don't try and understand this individual. And that was about valuing differences. But it also made me realise very early on the value of a coach. And I've been fortunate throughout my career that whenever there has been challenges or new roles or situations that I was uncomfortable with, I've been able to hold my hand up and go, I think I need a coach. And people have accommodated that and said, yeah, absolutely, if that's what you want and need. And that's been my personal journey with coaching as an individual. But actually, as a coach, I've spent the last 20 years working with organisations, working with individuals, either as a manager or as a learning and development specialist, to develop those coaching skills, because I just see them as so fundamental to both being the best individual you can be in so many situations, but also, as I said, that toolkit that gets you out of virtually any situation where you're stuck. If you can coach, then you can find the answer, because it doesn't have to come from you, but it can come from your skills. And Carolyn, you talked there about having a team of different thought processes and different mindsets. And I know, Bernard, you made the point before about, is it different coaching for different people, different roles, different levels? I'd say absolutely not. It's always about those same two principles of how well do you listen, how well do you question, and how well do you help somebody to dig into themselves to find that solution that you know is there. And I see the coaching journey as a lifelong thing. Recently, I was with an organisation who said to me, yeah, but I think we've done coaching. And I was like, whoa, coaching isn't something that's done. And it's certainly not a one and done intervention. And Richard, that's why it was so interesting to hear about your experience at BMS, because I remember working with the organisation many years ago and thinking about, how do we piece it together as a journey that is an ongoing thing, and not has a certain endpoint that says, right, we've done that, we've ticked that box, what do we move on to next? So in summary, I think, my journey with coaching is a lifelong one. It's something I'm always learning. It's something I'm massively passionate about inspiring in others. And nothing makes me prouder than seeing an organisation embrace a coaching culture and knowing that you've been part of that.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. That was really inspiring. And so over to you now, Rich, because you mentioned in your intro that you've had such a wide experience of coaching at all different levels. So can you just give us a flavour of that, and also touch on, Glenn's mentioned coaching culture. So what is a coaching culture, and how can organisations promote a coaching culture?
Great, yeah, and thanks, Carolyn and Glenn. It's really lovely to hear everyone's personal stories. Before I talk about maybe some organisational learnings, just to get at two simple things for me in my personal story of coaching. Number one is that it's always challenged me to think differently and challenge some of my perceptions. And there's been many situations I've been in where I've been coached and I've really had to challenge my own beliefs or challenge the realities that I was presenting myself. And I think that's amazing if you can help somebody to work through that. And I would also say that when I've received coaching in a few significant moments in my career, it's led to some really amazing outcomes that I've been able to grab hold of and realize, one of which was moving into the space of training and realizing that was my passion. And I'm so glad I did that 9 or 10 years ago, and have thoroughly enjoyed even more so my career after moving into a pure training and L&D space. So it certainly can be life-changing, I would say, and challenge your perspectives and belief. I guess a couple of things I would think about with organizational culture, and I was reflecting on this coming into this call, because I think there's probably people on this call here who are involved, as we are, a number of us, in rolling out coaching programs or in developing leaders in coaching. And I think that one of the mistakes that we can make is to just focus on capability development. And, Carolyn talked about her own personal journey, and that was great. But when we think about an organization or we think about a group of leaders, if we just focus on capability development, then I don't believe we'll build a really sustainable and powerful coaching culture. And I guess what I would say is we've really broken it down in our team and with our leaders into sort of 4 areas when we think about coaching culture. So I want to kind of make it as practical as possible. Number one is all around expectations. What's the expectation of the organization around coaching? What's the understanding of what we mean by coaching? How is it being prioritized? And how is it seen as being a core part of a leader's job? So if you don't have that in place, that's really the first thing you need to get into place when you think about it from an organizational perspective. We all understand what we mean by coaching, why it's important, and why it should be a core skill with with any people manager we have. Number 2 is capability development. We need to develop ourselves. However we do that, through formal learning, informal learning, and through on-the-job learning, to make sure that we have the skills, the tools, the approaches to consider. We also then should be thinking about, as an organization, what metrics, measures, and rewards we have in place. It's really important that we are giving credit to, we are rewarding, we are recognizing those people who have great coaching skills, or we have stories to tell of where we've coached people and that's had a better outcome, or it's helped someone move forward, that we potentially even think about including it in some of our annual appraisals or in our 360 feedback or through formal incentives. We need to have that structure in place so that people realize and are rewarded, and we come to see that virtuous cycle. And then I think, the last area to think about is what sustainability plan and activities do we have in place? I mentioned coaching circles. It could be stories that are shared. It could be tools being made available. It could be, regular refresh and coming together, role play, as Carolyn talked about. It could also be featuring experts, bringing in external companies to help you. So I think when we look, and the learnings that I have certainly seen, is that you need to have much more than just a training program on coaching in place to really build that coaching culture. And it really needs to be a full organizational commitment with a clear change management plan if you're looking to move into that space where you don't have it. And I think that as learning professionals, those of you who might be embarking or working on that, you've got to really consider things beyond maybe even your own scope of responsibility around capability development to ensure that you build that coaching culture, and it will take time. So those are just a few sort of tips and learnings and some real examples of some of the things we're practically trying to do in our organisation to build that coaching culture.
Thanks, Rich. That was really insightful, and it was really good to hear you talk about the expectation up front, and making sure that the organisation is really clear on what their expectation is. And, we've both had experiences of situations where you move into capability without ensuring that that expectation is set up front. And then the danger is that it doesn't sustain. So you inspire people, you get people really motivated during formal learning. And then once they leave that formal training and learning environment and go back out into their organization, it's not congruent. So they're not seeing those coaching skills being used by their leaders. They're not seeing those coaching skills recognized and rewarded and celebrated. And when there is an incongruence, those skills quickly, that new capability falls away because it's not seen as important. So there's a saying that really sticks with me, that people respect what you inspect. So if we've set the expectation that something is important, let's make sure that we really ask about it and we keep it high on the agenda throughout. So thanks for sharing those nuggets with us. We did have one question that came in actually, which I'd be really good to hear the panel's thoughts on this. So the question was, any advice please on how to deal with a toxic person within your team? Can coaching help with this? So I've got some thoughts, but I want to just see if any of my panel members want to jump in first with some initial thoughts on that. So any advice on how to deal with a toxic person in the team, and will coaching help with this? Carolyn, over to you.
Would love to share some insight. And I think this is where having the confidence to have a courageous conversation happens. And this is not something that will change overnight, like Rich was talking about, just an overall coaching culture. And I think this is where having a plan in place can help, and being committed to having those difficult conversations as often as they need to happen, and a case where having specific and clear examples and a process and a commitment to taking action and finding a way forward. So to answer the question simply, I believe that coaching can absolutely help having a toxic individual on a team, because our perception is only one version of the story, and we don't know why that behavior is coming across as toxicity. And the only way to know is to dig in and ask the questions and understand and listen with the individual in mind to really understand what is happening. Because my experience has been it's actually a bit unpredictable. And the good news, what I can share, is that things have improved after having those difficult conversations. And so I rely solely on that improvement because of my approach to coaching.
Lovely. Thanks, Carolyn. I love what you say about digging in. And I think so often we focus on the behavior, which is on the outside. So if we think about the iceberg analogy, we focus on what's at the tip of the iceberg, the piece that's sticking out of the water, which is the behaviors. And what we need to do is to get deeper and dig into the bit that's under the surface and really find out why. What's causing that toxic behavior? Because the more we can understand that, then the more likely we are to be able to find a way to work through that. Rich, were you flashing with some thoughts?
Yeah, just wanted to build on what Carolyn said. I think one of the things that, and I think this is a mindset of a coach that's important. I talked earlier about attitudes. There's always positive intent behind a behavior. And so building on what you were saying, people don't show up to work to do a bad job. And so, it's about us understanding and getting down under the surface, as you said. One of the things it thought to me about is there's some work out there around, what obstacles are getting in people's way. So could there be reasons behind that behavior that we're seeing, or some of those actions? Does the person even know? How can we help them to see other perspectives? We have to put ourselves in the shoes of the coachee, but we also sometimes have to help the coachee open their window of perception or recognize the unintended impacts of some of their actions. So absolutely, there's real opportunity there. And, I've had some coaching conversations with people who've ended up leaving the organization, and they have, and this might sound cheesy, but they have thanked me for actually being courageous enough to have the discussion and to getting out things in the open and to sharing perspectives and helping them to realize what they want to do and where they want to go. And, that's been really beneficial. So I think that positive mindset and that recognition that people are, there's a positive intent behind what's happening, and we need to help perhaps individuals to explore that and to dig into that and to have some own self-realization perhaps through the process.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rich. Some great nuggets there. We're coming on to the hour now. It's amazing how quickly the time flies. So I just want to take the opportunity to really thank our panel. So can we have some love hearts and some shows of appreciation for them giving up their time over the last hour and really graciously sharing what they do in their organisations and their own personal journeys with developing their coaching skills. There's been some real nuggets throughout, and we will be pulling together some show notes to share. Unfortunately, there's not a replay option right now for LinkedIn audio, but we will pull together some notes that summarises some of the top tips that have come through that we'll be able to share. So please make sure that you've connected or you've gone onto our website, which you'll find in my bio, to make sure that you receive those insights, and also that you get a copy of the article that I will be bringing out next week in honour of International Coaching Week, where I'll be really looking at what gets in the way of managers developing those skills. We know overwhelmingly that coaching is the single and most important thing to do as a manager, but we also know it's not happening. So what gets in the way, and how can we support you better to be able to develop those skills? So thanks very much for your time and for sharing this last hour with us, and we hope that you all have a fabulous weekend. You've been listening to Partnership Panels from Purposefully Blended. We'd love you to join our ever-growing community of learning professionals and people managers that are inspired to transform performance. Please pop over to our website, www.purposefullyblended.co.uk. Join our mailing list, access our historical show notes, and download our thought leadership pieces. Would you like to be a panelist? Perhaps you'd like to propose a topic for our next panel discussion. Drop me a message, Lucy Phillip, on LinkedIn. We'd be delighted to hear from you. Thanks for listening, thanks for connecting, and let's continue to make learning a strategic asset together.